Okay guys, we're going to read chapter 14 of Clara Rides Rancho today. You're listening carefully. We will be able to take a reading counts quiz on this pretty soon, so make sure you're listening every single day and then answering the questions, okay? Here we go. The accident. December 26th, 1845, Rancho de los Osos. That afternoon it started raining. The wind howled around the outside of the hacienda. Lightning lit up the skies. Rolls of thunder boomed as the rain beat down heavier and heavier. It reminded me of the storms when we sailed around Cape Horn. I watched Father as he paced back and forth in the sala. He had come back to the rancho alone. He was soaking wet, and his face and arms were scratched and bloody. His clothes were ripped and torn, covered with mud. Father told us a terrible story. That afternoon, Father, Uncle Frank, Ernesto, and the vaqueros had found over 100 stray cattle in the arroyo. Before they could herd the cattle out of the arroyo, a gang of fierce-looking men on horseback had swooped down on them. The banditos raised their guns, ready to kill Father and Uncle Frank. Without warning, there was a loud roar. Out of the mountains, a wall of water gushed down the arroyo, sweeping horses, cattle, and men in all directions. Father had clung to his strong horse, and together they climbed up the banks of the arroyo to higher ground. Father had spent many hours in the pouring rain searching for Uncle Frank, Ernesto, and the other men. The muddy waters of the flash flood had swept everyone away. Finally, as darkness gathered, Father had decided to head back to the rancho to get help. When Father got to the rancho, he had immediately sent Luis and several vaqueros with extra horses out into the night to look for the missing men. Father told the men to take guns. What happened to Uncle Frank? What about Ernesto and all the vaqueros? Mother tried to comfort Tia Maria, but Tia cried and cried. The twins sat next to their mother, holding her hands and patting her on her back. Elena brought in steaming mugs of coffee. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. The night dragged on, and no one went to bed. Father continued to pace the sala. I had never seen him so upset or worried. Senorita Margarita and Senorita Victoria sat with us by the fire until the first light of dawn. Ow, 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 the wind continued, whistling and howling. Somewhere outside, I heard Cody barking. I thought of the cupola, and I ran up to the stairs and climbed the ladder to the lookout. I focused the spyglass. In the early light of dawn, I could see a group of men approaching on the rancho on horseback. My heart jumped into my mouth when I saw one of the men leading the horse. I looked closer. It was Uncle Frank's horse, Dorado, and across the saddle lay the body of a man. I dropped the spyglass and raced downstairs. Father, Father, I yelled. Men are coming. Father loaded his gun and went out onto the veranda. He made the rest of us stay in the house. We waited anxiously. We could hear men shouting, and then we heard Father's urgent command, "Open the door, Clara!" I pulled open the front door, and there stood Ernesto, Father, and Luis holding up a limp body of Uncle Frank. The men carried Uncle Frank into his bedroom, and Tia and Mother followed. The rest of us waited in the sala. Soon Luis came out of the bedroom, and he looked tired and worried. Before anyone could ask a question, Luis said, "Senor Frank is badly hurt." "Tell us, my son, what happened?" Elena put her arms around Luis. "I led the search party into the mountains," began Luis, "and as we rode up one of the canyons, we saw the muddy waters of the flash flood, and we followed the banks of the flooded arroyo. We saw dead cattle and horses that had been thrown against the rocks when the water had gushed down the arroyo. Some of the animals were half buried in mud. Only a few were alive. Most of the vaqueros had escaped the flood waters, but several other men lay dead. I did not recognize them. They must have been the banditos that were stealing our cattle. I found my father and Senor Frank in a small cave. My father had a gash on his head, but Senor Frank was unconscious and barely breathing. Just then, Ernesto came out of the bedroom, and he put his arm around Luis and Elena. The gash on his head was oozing blood. "Luis, I'm very proud of you. You have proven yourself to be a brave man. From now on, you will ride with the vaqueros." And then he said in a serious voice, "Senor Frank's leg is broken in 4 places. We need wooden splints to make a brace. Go to our workshop, Luis, and ask the cooper for something thin, flat boards. We will also need strips of raw hide." Luis left the hacienda immediately. Over here it says, "Across the saddle lay the body of a man." So here we can see Senor Frank. And that is the end of our chapter.